Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publisher of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about serial adultery, indifferent landscape paintings, thieving doctors, and threatening seers. It's the Blue Geranium, a Miss Marple episode starring Julia McKenzie. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Teresa, how are you doing today?
Hello, love. I've been better, but I am better than I have been in the last week or two. So I'm looking forward to discussing the Blue Geranium, and this is a wonderful example of when ITV, when their directors and producers and scriptwriters were firing on all cylinders, what they could do with a nothing story. The ITV Marple production doesn't get a lot of love. From the tiny bit of reading that I've done online, it doesn't seem to get a lot of love because they really played fast and loose with the text, unlike the Joan Hickson Marples, which tended to be extremely faithful. And ITV, well, they had the opportunity to film all 12 Marples, and they also had the short stories, of which they actually filmed 2. Someone there decided it wasn't enough, and so they went ahead and filmed other non-Marple properties, and I think that's one reason why a lot of people don't like it. They would make anywhere from minor to wholesale changes, including changing the identity of the murderer in some cases. But when they were really working, when everything worked, they made some great episodes, and this is one of them. They took essentially a pretty much nothing story and really fleshed it out. All of the tropes are there, including Miss Marple, reminded of a village parallel of the tangled wool of some knitter's jumpers, which are sweaters for us Americans, knitting all these jumpers, and they're all tangled up and trying to figure out what strand is the one that matters in the big tangle of intertwining stories, of intertwining yarn. I don't know why sometimes ITV chose non-Marple properties to insert Miss Marple when they had all of the other short stories. This one and Grenshaw's Folly were both really great episodes. The scriptwriter ran with the concept. They should have filmed all the rest of the Miss Marple short stories like Poirot did all of the Poirot short stories. Because, wow, the 2 that we got are both great episodes. When ITV ran the Marple episodes, they introduced Miss Marple to an audience that may not be familiar with the Joan Hickson adaptations, and this is livelier, and this is faster, and this is bouncier. Who knows how many people came away from the ITV episodes and said, wow, I gotta read those books.
Probably one reason might be for the lack of respect for the series is Julia McKenzie, who is a fine actress. There's nothing wrong with her about that, but she doesn't fit the Joan Hickson model of the kind of the scarecrow, thin lady with the penetrating stare.
Oh, yes. Geraldine McEwen is probably a lot closer in most people's eyes to Miss Marple, but Julia McKenzie, she reminds me of Angela Lansbury and Jessica Fletcher. A brisk, no-nonsense, younger spinster. I think Julia was in her late 50s or early 60s when she made these films. That 10 years really does make a difference, but also she has a different look, she has a different body type, she has this briskness, this efficiency, this I will get there. It just doesn't quite feel like Miss Marple the way Joan Hickson did or Geraldine McEwen did. It does remind you of Jessica Fletcher of Murder, She Wrote.
She's a more modern type. You couldn't imagine her growing up in the Victorian era.
No, you just can't. You just can't. There are people who love her as Miss Marple. She's probably more accurate to being Miss Marple than Margaret Rutherford was. But I think that Julia McKenzie bothered some of the viewers more so than Geraldine did, because she just doesn't quite fit the image.
Well, and she doesn't do dithery.
No, she does not. She is brisk and efficient.
Yes, and so even so, when she's There's the scene in which she's talking with Detective Somerset. This is after he's making the phone during the phone call he's making at the booth.
If I can be any help to you, I caught that and I thought, wow, Joan Hickson would have never said that, or her writers wouldn't have. She wouldn't have let her writers say that, or even Geraldine. Certainly not Helen Hayes. It would have been, oh, if I can be of any assistance to, not like that, but oh, if how would I phrase that?
I don't think she would just say that. She would never put herself forward like that. She would always be apologetic and, there's just I think there's one tiny thing I just need to add. But she would never say, if you need any help, you just call me.
If you need any help from me, you just call, you idiot, you fat, drunken idiot in the police call box. No, she wouldn't have said that. It would have been more along the lines of, if there's anything you want to ask me, if I could possibly help you in some way, if I think of something, I hope I'm not too much of a bother. No, this was Julia saying, when you need my help, you know where I am.
Yeah. Well, we can get into the story because this takes place in a small village, and it's a village Miss Marple is visiting. She's visiting the minister there, and his niece, who Miss Marple knows as well. Yes,
his niece Hester. Yep. These are the Milewaters, Reverend Milewater, the vicar, and Hester Milewater.
And we get to meet the Pritchard families.
Yes, and this gets a little complicated because you see on the when you look at the Internet Movie Database, or you look at the cast list in our upcoming book, you'll see that there's a whole lot of Pritchards. And what happened is you have a pair of brothers. You have George and Lewis. George is the go-getter, and Lewis is the younger brother who has always been basically lackadaisical, feckless, and weak. George, during the war, was dating the beautiful, the charming young RAF nurse named Philippa, but then he got to Philippa's little village, which is the village that he is now residing in, and he meets her much more beautiful sister Mary, much more flirtatious, much more overtly sexy. And George is just bowled over, and he runs off with Mary, not Philippa. His fiance's sister stole the man.
Yeah, which I always kind of find.
I know, because you're assuming that George had no agency. And of course he has agency, because it is perfectly possible for a man to look at a hot woman and say, "No, thank you, Miss Lewinsky," for a blast for the past from you folks. And then you immediately call personnel and say, she needs to be transferred to a different department right away. And then the problem goes away. This is called having spine, having character. But George has a weak streak.
That's right. And he's a serial adulterer.
And he is a serial adulterer, and just like his brother, they both have weak streaks. Mm-hmm. And so you have the two Pritchard brothers who married the sisters, because Philippa ended up marrying George's weak, feckless younger brother, the one who is still writing a novel, and failed novel writers show up regularly in Agatha Christie. I guess she met a lot of them, and these are people who will never ever finish their book. And so here's Lewis Pritchard, who will never ever finish the book, and I can't remember if he was in the short story, and he may not have been. They really fleshed out the short story amazingly in order to turn essentially a nothing little story into an hour-and-a-half movie.
Now, Mary Pritchard is in the story.
She
is an amazing villainess.
Oh, yeah. She is spoiled. She is self-centered. She is sure she knows better than everyone else. She's extremely superstitious. She's very needy, and she is a hole into which you can pour emotion into, and it will never be enough.
Yeah, she's kind of an invalid.
Yes, and as it turns out, she actually is an invalid, because I thought this was so well done. So you see all the way through the episode, you see Philippa being loving and caring towards her ill older sister, the one who stole her man. She's obviously forgiven her sister. She's trying to take care of her sister. Oh my God. Poor Mary. Mary really is sick. Well, it turns out that Mary really is sick. Dr. Frayne was wrong about that. Mary is sick because Philippa is letting her anger out every time she makes a little treat for her sister, and only her sister, and she laces it with Pine Sol. or Rinso or any one of a wide variety of household chemicals that you use every day to clean your kitchen, and that little extra bit of something really tears up Mary's stomach.
And we see evidence of this. And again, this is how well constructed the episode is, because early in the episode, she has some tarts that she's going to bring over to Mary, and Lewis reaches for them, and she says, no, you can't have those. You can't have those. Those are for Mary, which leads to Lewis making a fat joke at her expense.
I didn't like this. I didn't like how they handled this with Mary, because everybody makes fat jokes about Mary. And when you see her in that blue dress, and I guarantee she's got a girdle on underneath that, she is not morbidly obese. She looks voluptuous. She does not look sloppy and fat. She looks voluptuous. But anyway, yes, Lewis gets his hand slapped by his wife about, no, these beautiful, wonderful little fruit tarts with the creme patisserie and the beautifully arranged fruit on top and the little glacé on top of all of that. No, they're for Mary. Mm-hmm. And, well, they are for Mary because she's laced them with
Rinso. With Rinso. An added ingredient.
A little added ingredient. I did have to wonder about that, because wouldn't you notice the smell or the taste? But I guess not.
Hard to say. In fact, the smell is what leads Miss Marple to figure out what actually happened, because she's watching in the very beginning. She's watching her gardener mixing up a potion of cyanide, and she caught a whiff of it, and she realizes it smells exactly like smelling salts.
Yes, and the crystals too.
But she doesn't say this.
And the crystals too.
So that's the thing that ends up being revealed at the end, which fits all the clues. Again, this is a well-structured episode.
Oh, yeah, but that's not why she figured out that Philippa was poisoning Mary. She figured that out because Philippa had made some kind of a treat, like a soup of some sort for Mary, and the vicar had several spoonfuls without being noticed. When every time Philippa turned her back, the vicar took a couple more spoonfuls, and it made him good and sick.
Yes, there's that too. Again, it's another set of clues.
Where she is using all of her senses. She is paying attention to what she is seeing. Then you realize that Philippa never forgave her sister. She never forgave her sister. Mm-hmm. And she's not super keen on her husband either. Although, again, this is really interesting. I think this is one of the failures of literature, and certainly a failure of film. You have all of these married couples who have no children. They have 0 children. You would think that someone like George with Mary, they would have had at least 1 child. They have none. That's because it is easier to remove children from film and TV, because you don't have to deal with child actors then. And in fact, we had a quote on our Instagram page, I think it was David Lodge, that literature is about having sex and real life is about having children. I'm paraphrasing very badly, but that's the gist of it. In real life, you don't have that much sex, but you do have children. And in literature, it's all about the sex, but nobody ever has any children.
But Mary is and again, they don't say this, but if you wonder about Mary, part of her attitude has to be as a result of being constantly ill, because also people are not believing her.
Yes.
And it doesn't help that she's very much a spiritualist. And she goes in for horoscopes and seers and seeresses and anything signs from above and portents.
She's apparently always felt entitled her entire life. She grew up in that village. The vicar makes a point of telling Miss Marple that they came back to the village, she and her husband George, even though they were wealthy and could have lived anywhere else, and they probably should have lived in London so he could be closer to his business interests. But she wanted to come back to the village to be Lady Bountiful and have the villagers whom she despised crawl to her, begging for a little money to fix the golf course, to fix the park, to fix the wall in the church, to do all of the repair work that somebody, that does need to be paid for.
And of course, she bought the house. They bought the house from the previous owners, which were relatives of the doctor.
Yes, the doctor's parents used to own that house, and he still resents the fact that they lost the house and that George Pritchard essentially forced the house to be sold at fire sale prices, and that's why every time he goes into the house, because George Pritchard bought the entire house and all the contents, all the charming knickknacks and artwork and fancy clocks and so forth. And so whenever Dr. Frayne goes over to see Mary, And he must not be that good a doctor. He not only pockets small things that used to belong to his parents, but he believes that Mary's illness is all in her head. He believes it's all in her head, and his magic medicine that he gives her is water in the special blue bottle. And yet he does not seem to notice that Mary really does suffer from various weird gastric upsets because Philippa's poisoning her. So he must not be a very good doctor.
Yes, you could think about it in another way. If he prescribed 2 weeks in Spain or 2 weeks in France,
or away from Philippa,
then
Mary would start feeling better.
Mary might actually start feeling better. So
yes.
He doesn't really try very much. And I guess, let's face it, you're a country doctor in the middle of nowhere. Well, your skills are kind of...
And he resents them.
And he resents them as well. So he's already predisposed. And, of course, Mary doesn't help her case by being pretty toxic.
She's toxic and a loon. Mm-hmm. I can talk a lot about spiritualism and the occult, but she takes all the worst aspects of it to basically let her do whatever it is that she wants to do and behave however she wants to behave. She certainly makes a point of screaming at the vicar about your fraudulent religion.
In public at the golf course on the day her husband was to be elected captain of the golf course.
Yes, an important position in the village. It says, as George Pritchard moves closer and closer to the position of, oh, Mr. George wouldn't like that, or Lord George this, or Lord George that, when he eventually gets his title, because he'll pay for it, and then he will become the Lord of the Manor in title as well as in reality. But yeah, Mary is absolutely toxic. And they do make a point of saying that, she went after George and then he cheated on her nonstop. He would have been much happier with Philippa.
We know he cheated with the nurse, Susan Carstairs.
Yes.
And we know he tried to with, at least according to Carolyn
she
Copeland.
says
She says. But it's great. It's a great double standard going on here. One of those things where you, at the end of the story, you have to look at Copeling, I think. Yes, it's Copeling. I looked it up. I had it misspelled on the list. You have to look at her statements and say, well, is that really true?
Yeah, because she probably almost every word out of her mouth was a lie. Mm-hmm. Carefully gauged to destroy the Pritchards because they had money and she didn't. And she, being smarter than Dr. Frayne, figured out fairly early on that Philippa was poisoning her sister.
That's right, and then
she began blackmailing Philippa because, of course, if Mary was dead and George was hung by the crown, or Louis and Philippa would inherit all of that loot, and Nurse Copeland would make sure she got her share. And I would guess that when she showed up, Philippa recognized her, because Philippa is the one who told Miss Marple and some other people about when they were in the RAF that there was a nurse known as the Wasp, and you didn't want to get too close to the Wasp because you'd get stung, because she worked in the black market and she would water things down. She would water perfume, she would water alcohol. She probably adulterated medications too that she sold on the black market because she wanted to get more money, money was the sole focus of her life.
There's also a nice motif that works through this, and it starts when Miss Marple meets the Reverend Milewater, and what a wonderful last name that is. It's like milquetoast and mild and meek. Anyway, she meets with the Reverend in the church, and they comment on this painting on the wall of the 7 deadly sins.
Yes, for those of you who can't remember, let's see if I can remember. There is sloth, gluttony, anger, lust, pride, greed, envy.
And envy. Yes.
And all of those 7 deadly sins show up. Because pride and vanity, you could describe it as either way, and George is described as vain and proud, and that's his weakness. There's a lot of envy. Louis is weak, and he envies his brother, but he isn't willing to work. And there's a lovely scene where Mary says something about, the body found on the golf course, and that could be a novel. And he said, a pot boiler, with the sneer of a literary writer who is going to be supported by his wife forever because he will never finish the damn book. And if he does manage to finish the damn book and he finds an agent and it gets published, he'll sell about 3 copies because nobody's going to want to read that bilge. Whereas if he wrote a pot boiler about a body found on the golf course, why, he could sell hundreds of thousands of books and he could make some serious money. Mm-hmm. But no, he wants to take his wife's money and gamble it away because that makes him feel more like a man and more like his brother. He is envious.
Oh, absolutely. And he borrows money from George to pay off the gangster. And even when the gangster pokes him in the nose as a warning, he still puts down the money on another horse, and for the stupidest reason, because the name was that of a Roman general who never lost a battle.
Which has nothing whatsoever to do with the horse.
Yes. Oh, there was a lovely moment where I think it was Miss Marple looking at the newspaper, and on the page, it must be the sports page, saying that the horse fell at the first jump. That's how much of a plug that horse was, and probably was made into glue soon thereafter.
Soon thereafter, yes. And then there was anger with Philippa. Philippa's very angry. She is furiously angry at her sister. You get lust, the adulterous affairs, and then you actually have a chaste affair, because George is also having a chaste affair with Hazel Instow, the artist, who is not a very good artist, by the way. Her paintings looked, what they showed on screen, if they were trying to say that she was a good artist, ITV should have spent a little money on a good artist to make those paintings, because they were crappy.
Well, the portraits are fine. It was the landscape that just looked really terrible. Really
terrible.
Even if you were trying to imitate like a Monet in that style. I mean, she wasn't trying for accuracy, but it was
it was really terrible. But that landscape served a purpose, because Hazel used the same phrase that Eddie Seward did on the bus when Miss Marple met him, and then
in nature.
Yeah, about God in nature, when his body was found on the golf course.
On the shore next to the golf course.
Yeah, on the shore next to the golf course. He had hung himself and then realized at the last minute, this is really a bad idea.
Which is a thing. That is the thing among suicides, because they've interviewed people who have successfully jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge.
And as soon as they leap over, they think, my God.
What the heck am I doing? And, they desperately try to claw their way back up the air like a Looney Tunes cartoon. But unfortunately, gravity works in real life.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But Miss Marple, when she's talking to Hazel about that I won't say terrible, that indifferent landscape, mm-hmm. Hazel uses the same phrase, and Miss Marple thinks, I've heard this before. And that's how she's able to tie Hazel the painter with Eddie Seward, who was drying out because he was rich and he was abusive and he was an alcoholic, and his wife disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Basically, she got tired of being his punching bag, and she thought, maybe this is the missing wife. Mm-hmm. It all ties together so well. Everything wraps up.
And then on top of that, what is the thread through all this is George Pritchard, because he is the tense center of all this. And you're watching a lot of this through George. You're watching Mary rake him over the coals and him being furiously embarrassed in public. And you're watching Lewis caging money from him.
This shows in a way that George might have, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as weak, but George is not the kind of man who's going to punch out his wife for being impossible.
Yeah.
He does not slap Mary. You can tell Mary rules that roost. He doesn't beat her up. You can tell.
Yeah, he doesn't go off to London by himself and stay in his club all week and then come back on the weekends like Archie did with Agatha.
Yeah, that's right. He doesn't do that. And he doesn't tell his brother. He doesn't confront his brother until towards the end. There's a scene at the church where he finally reveals how much he despises his brother for his cadging weakness, and the fact that his brother, who has 3 children, does not bother trying to take care of his wife and his children. His brother is less of a man than he is.
Yeah, and it's a great scene because it comes up before what sparks it in a way is Philippa ragging on him in the church in front of everybody. And it's like you could almost expect this is like an English way of repressing the emotions. How far will he go? How far will he last suppressing all this? And you're literally waiting for it to happen all the way through until
and then you
finally...
get the wonderful explosion. That was one mistake that they made in that church scene, was that church was almost empty.
Yeah.
And at that time period, every single pew would have been filled because everybody went to church on Sundays. if only so they could discuss with their neighbors what's been going on. I won't say because they were devout churchgoers, but that's what you would have done. You would have not had a half-empty church like that.
Yeah, it's the center of village life in a time. When was this?
This was set in about 1952.
Right, okay, yes, after World War II.
So you still would have had everyone in church.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have had a huge audience for Philippa accusing George of murdering her sister. And this is Philippa's guilt talking. And then of George getting into the fight with his brother about the gambling, and you claim that you're writing, but you don't write anything at all. That wasn't in the short story, I'm pretty sure.
No.
But she's had a number of feckless men who claim that they are writing something. Leo Argyle in Ordeal by Innocence, Johnny Summerhays in Mrs. McGinty's Dead. I know that there have been others.
And there have been some successful ones, like Miss Marple's
nephew Raymond.
Yes, Raymond,
who's a very wealthy, successful, noted literary writer.
And Ariadne Oliver.
And Ariadne Oliver, of course, too.
So she certainly writes of what she knows. And you and I have met a number of people they've been working on books all their lives. Some of them actually get published, and it's more of like a hobby. But through the CPRW, through the romance writers, there were a lot of writers there. They seem to like the socializing more than the actual hard work of creation.
Which I can understand, which is why I've only managed to publish 3 novels to date, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, 500,000 words.
Well, they are big novels. They are big novels. I write as Odessa Moon, by the way, folks. So if you go to Peschel Press and look for Odessa Moon, you can see my science fiction romances, which I guarantee, even at my pitiful sales, sell better than anything that Lewis Pritchard in this episode would ever write, unless he starts writing, potboiler mysteries about bodies on the edges of golf courses.
Yeah.
And, what a great setup was handed to him. His 3 children go off to get the ball out of the rough because his brother missed his shot. I'm not sure what the golf term.
He sliced it. He sliced it into the woods.
He sliced it into the woods.
Because they were joking about it because they said, we hope you'll beat the last captain for length, which was a woman. It was something like 170 yards. And even back then, he should be able to do it easily. And then he just shanks it right into the woods.
So there was a golf joke buried in there.
Yeah.
There was a golf joke buried in there. And then there's Lewis, the failed novelist who's getting nothing written. And he sees his 3 children. They go off. They're there to collect the golf ball, the first golf ball, so it can be, bronzed and put on a little pedestal in the mantelpiece in the 19th hole club. And his kids are chasing the golf ball through the woods on the edge of the rough down to the river, and they find a body. I mean, what fabulous setup for a writer. It's just, that idea just drops into your lap. But no, he's too good to write something like that.
And it would have been still good even if he wanted to be literary, because you can think of a way of writing it so that there's a murder mystery involved. But on the other hand, who is this person? Why is everyone so upset? And you think of the web of intrigue that's shown here in the Blue Geranium, and you would have had a great motor to investigate everybody's lives of a quaint provincial English village and, expose the rot underneath in kitchen table realism.
Proving in the immortal words of Buckaroo Banzai that no matter where you go, there you are, and you're really writing about your own internal rot.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so fun, and it all tied up really well. In fact, the only thing I think I would have added is that Detective Somerset, who is a drunk who's been cashiered out of London until he can get his alcoholism under control, and he seems to have, is he should have, when Miss Marple suggested it because of Sir Henry Clithering, he should have said at some point when he was on the phone, make sure that forensics checks under the dead man's fingernails to see if that's his own flesh under his fingernails or someone else's.
Okay, because what you're talking about is Eddie Seward, who was found dead, had scratches on his throat that the detective thought was put on there by the murderer. And Miss Marple is saying if he hung himself and decided he didn't want to hang himself, he'd be scratching at himself.
He'd be scrabbling at the necktie, and the necktie held long enough to break his neck and kill him, but it didn't break fast enough so that he could be down there on the ground going, and that's a very minor point, but it also demonstrates that Detective Somerset it was probably right for Scotland Yard to send him down to some little nowhere village where these couple of murders, because there are one suicide and two murders, because Susan Carstairs also gets murdered in a way that looks the same, which I thought really tied in well, because Susan Carstairs turns out to be the previous nurse, and George Pritchard got her knocked up, but he's taking care of her.
That's right. He fashioned a room at the abandoned mill for her to live in, I guess, until the baby comes. Until the baby comes, which I assume they have to take her away, because what is he going to do? Call the doctor over and say, you got to handle a pregnancy right now and don't tell anybody?
Yeah, that's...
Oh, God.
He should have set her up in a pied-à-terre in London. But she's strangled in a very similar fashion
with George's necktie.
With George's necktie to how Eddie Seward died, by hanging himself with a necktie. And I thought those two things tied together beautifully. The whole thing with the blue hollyhock and the blue geranium, that was really well handled. Geraniums, by the way, you can get blue ones for you scientifically minded gardeners. If you have hydrangeas can grow blue, but geraniums are never blue. Geraniums are never blue. Hydrangeas you can make bluer. There are actually very few blue flowers, no matter what your gardening catalog tells you, because those people who write them are liars. But that I thought was really well handled too, because it's the litmus. And in fact, if you are paying attention, there is a moment when Nurse Copling has the little strip, the test strips, and she dips it into the chamber pot that Mary Pritchard peed in off screen. And she is checking the alkalinity or acidity of Mary Pritchard's urine, because that's one of the things that nurses have to do. And so there's that little clue right there on screen. You see her holding a little piece of paper, and it was pink, and the bottom half of it, which is wet, is blue.
And you just have to come up on your own with the idea that whatever she's sniffing,
the
smelling salts itself.
It's smelling salts.
It's the smelling salts that would possibly turn the litmus paper blue. And she has to do it near enough to the wall where the litmus paper's on this wallpaper of flowers for it. That's kind of a weakness of it, although I don't know how
because she did a beautiful job of making the geranium and the hollyhock look identical to the hand-printed, hand-blocked wallpaper. Yeah, it looked identical. It was just a really fun episode, and I really recommend it. And for those of you who say, oh my God, I can't watch ITV's Marple because of the way they play fast and loose with the text. Well, you're right, they do. But sometimes, not always, some of them are pretty terrible, but sometimes their episodes are really good. And this is one of them. This really works.
Now, there's one question. Since we haven't gone through and actually made a list of the top 10 of the 201 that we've seen, would this go in the top 10?
It's pretty close. Sometimes it's easier to make a list of the bottom, because ITV is also in the bottom with, why, look, there's the Sittaford mystery, and what a train wreck that was.
And Evans as well, so you immediately...
Well, no, there was a lot I really liked about why didn't they ask Evans, right up until the last 15 minutes when the solution arrived from a ballpark in China. And... But, wow, that episode was really firing on all cylinders. Right up until the last 15 minutes. ITV's Marple have a tendency to be really moving great. There was also Nemesis, and wow, totally rewrote the plot. Wow, it was moving great until the last 15 minutes when the scriptwriter realized that he only had 15 minutes in which to tie up 2 hours worth of loose ends, and the story just collapses.
Mm-hmm.
But this one doesn't.
Yeah, this one will not disappoint. And
this one also illustrates something that Miss Marple herself says in Sleeping Murder about who is on the spot. Mm-hmm. It's never brought up, it's never mentioned, but frequently in an Agatha Christie murder, when you brush away, when you untangle all of the wool and look at all of the strands of yarn and how they work around each other, you have to look at the one that is there all the time. You know, when you clear away the rubble, what actually happened and who was actually there.
Right.
And Mary Pritchard died of obviously some kind of poisoning, and who was there? Well, the nurse is there all the time. And in this case, it was Nurse Copling, and she took the bottle of poisonous crystals of cyanide because she knew that Mary Pritchard breathed it in all the time in order to... Oh my God, I have to get my heart going again. She knew exactly that Mary Pritchard would use this. She just didn't know when. And then as soon as that she came in, she swapped the bottles out, and they look identical, and everything looks the way it did before, so you would never know that anything had been changed.
And she peels off the litmus paper on the wallpaper.
Yep, and it goes into her pocket, and no one will know.
Absolutely. And we have a couple of more episodes to talk about after this, and we're going to also add to the list Now You See It?
Oh yes, we're going to see Now You See It, because it's the last of Agatha the Star. And Agatha Christie is a character in this movie, and we're going to see how they handle her. She has gone on to not just a life as a mystery writer, she has become a character, a woman detective who reinvents herself, second chance at love.
Yes, the woman under stress who, disappears, but also, as in she also solves mysteries.
Yes, she is now solving mysteries, and she's in a number of novels,
yep.
Either about her or she's a peripheral character, but she has become a character.
In a way that very few other authors get. Arthur Conan Doyle doesn't really have that much of a body
not
of
so
work.
much.
He shows up every once in a while in something like a Murdoch mystery.
I think Edgar Allan Poe, people talk about him solving mysteries. Jane Austen is probably the person who has gone on to the biggest afterlife as a character, because you have Jane Austen solving mysteries way back then, and I have actually seen Jane Austen as a modern day character because she was a vampire. And she was made, I swear I'm not making this up, she was turned into a vampire back just before her death. So that's why she supposedly died, but she didn't. She was a vampire, and she's moved forward with the times. And so, yes, she wears a nice pantsuit, and she owns a bookstore with cats, and she solves mysteries in the modern day, and I'm sure I'm remembering this.
Okay. Look it up, folks. It's on the internet somewhere. And this concludes our episode of Agatha Christie She Watched. I'm Bill Peschel.
And I'm Teresa Peschel. And remember, if you want to come out and meet us in person, look at our website, because we have our upcoming events listed. And if you're in the central Pennsylvania area, we'd love to chat.
Absolutely. And we'll see you at the movies.
Bye-bye.
Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.